Always write flawed characters. If you've ever taken a writing class or read a book on characterization, then I'm sure you've come across that advice before, and it is good advice. But what does it really mean? What does it mean to write a flawed character? What kind of flaws are we talking about? Why does it matter so much? Well, in this video, that is exactly what we are going to talk about. Writing flawed characters is important because perfect characters are completely unrealistic and unrelatable, first off, because we know that people aren't that way. We know we're not that way, and we know the people we see and talk to and interact with every day aren't that way. People are complex. For as good as we are, we also have faults. And if you write a character without flaws and faults, then there's no way for the audience to actually connect to that character or empathize with them or like them. But perfect characters also rob your story of so much of its potential power and impact. Because watching a character wrestle through a series of obstacles and engage with their own external and internal flaws to grow and change and transform into the character they needed to be in order for the story to be resolved successfully, that is the process that we recognize and find ourselves in within the stories that we read. So ensuring that you're writing flawed characters is partly a process of ensuring that you're writing meaningful stories in the first place. Now, of course, it's easy to say write a flawed character, but what does that really mean in practice? There's two primary types of flaws that you can and should include for most of your characters, and very often you want to make sure you're using both. The first is external limitations. The second is internal misbeliefs. Let's break each of those down in a little bit more detail. External limitations are things about your character that limit or complicate or constrain their ability to relate to the world around them and to the other characters around them in various ways. Sometimes those are physical limitations. Sometimes those have more to do with social class or cultural limitations, the way that the world sees your character because of elements of their history or their background. But those external limitations are really important because they provide a kind of obstacle or barrier or challenge that your character needs to struggle to overcome. But if the only kind of flaw that you're writing for your character is an external one, then it keeps the action of your character's growth largely on the surface in that external world. And that's just an incomplete or a not fully satisfying version of growth and change. You want to make sure that yes, you have those external limitations in place because they complicate your story and they make your character's journey more interesting, but you want to make sure that you also have the internal misbelief component in place because that is where the real power of your story and your character's growth and progression through the story really come from. So where external limitations have more to do with ways that your character struggles to relate to the world around them, internal misbeliefs have everything to do with the way that your character sees themselves or what they believe about the world and other people in them. And we all know from experience how incredibly powerful our own beliefs about ourselves or about the world can be and how much they can shape our thoughts and our actions and our choices. And they have the exact same effect for your characters. One of the best ways to create incredibly powerful story energy is by making sure that especially your protagonist's internal flaws stand as a direct obstacle to the actual resolution of the story, and ideally, if you can, are directly related to your story's theme and meaning. If the resolution of your story requires your character to be sacrificial, make their internal flaw that they are selfish and believe that no one else will help them and they have to only look out for themselves and everyone's on their own in the world. So that they have to learn through their experiences and the things that they go through in the story how to change their perception of themselves or the world. If the story's positive resolution requires them to trust others, have them start out trusting no one. If the story's resolution requires them to believe in themselves and to take great risks, have them start out timid and not believing in themselves. By simply placing your character's internal misbelief about themselves or the world as a direct obstacle to the successful resolution of the story and the climax of the story, you create an inevitable conflict that will require growth and change and transformation, which your readers will intuit right from the very beginning when they begin to see those flaws in action. And that kind of conflict of tension and requirement of growth and transformation is deeply compelling, and we can't help but get invested in it, to empathize with it, and to care deeply about what is going to happen and how that is going to play out across the course of the story. One really good recent example of this is Disney's Encanto and Mirabel's character as the protagonist of that story. She has two primary limitations as a character. The first is an external limitation. She doesn't have a power or a gift or an ability like the rest of her family does, and that immediately separates her from them. It creates a lot of challenges that she has to deal with because she doesn't have the easy out of a magical gift, and she has to deal with everything on her own. So that's an external limitation that affects her ability to relate to the world around her. But she also has an internal limitation that directly relates to the primary theme of the story, which is what makes it such an emotional and impactful story to begin with. Her internal limitation is that she doesn't believe she is as worthy as the rest of her family because she doesn't have that gift. She thinks there's something wrong with her and that somehow it's her fault, and she believes that she needs to constantly strive to make up for that by overcompensating, and is focused primarily on how the other people in her life feel about her, because she has not been able to fully accept herself and her own worth. Now, that's a really powerful internal misbelief that I think a lot of us, I certainly, could really resonate with when I was watching that story. Her process of growing through the experiences of the story and the challenges that she tackles until the final moment when she is able to break through that and actually accept herself as fully worthy regardless of what she can or can't do, is what enables her to first forgive her abuela for the way that they related, and then to become the character who could go back to the family and explain to them that they can and need to have that same realization just in time. She's the one that brings the gift of her breakthrough back to the rest of the characters in order to bring about the positive resolution of the story. And if she had not been able to overcome that internal misbelief at exactly the right moment in the climax of the story, it would have ended very differently. The intersection of the internal tract of that story with the external tract of that story landing at the climax is what makes it such a powerful moment and such an impactful and memorable moment, and it's a huge part of what makes that story so successful. So the next time you're working on a new story and you're working out what your characters are going to look like and how you're going to write them, spend some extra time thinking about your characters' flaws, both their external limitations and some of the ways that that can create interesting conflict and constraint within your story, but also their internal misbeliefs and the ways that those misbeliefs can serve as obstacles to the positive resolution of your story. And I think you'll find that as you do that, both your characters and the story as a whole will become richer and more complex, more interesting, and much more impactful and meaningful to all of us who can't wait to read it.